Minister.
I present the Government's response to the report of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee on its inquiry into reforming Australia's treaty-making process and seek leave to have the document incorporated in Hansard.
Is leave granted? There being no objection, leave is granted. Thank you, Minister. We now move to committee reports on page 13. Yes, Senator Whish-Wilson.
I seek leave to make a statement in regards to that.
In terms of the minister's...
Correct the report the minister's just...
Oh, okay. In terms of the government response? Yes.
Yes. In 2 days' time, Mr Acting Deputy President, in New Zealand, this Thursday, the 4th of February, the Australian government will be joining with 11 other countries to sign the biggest so-called free trade deal that this country has ever entered into. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. It's a set of rules and regulations, that our government has signed us up to, the executive has signed us up to, a set of rules and regulations that everyone in this Senate chamber and in this parliament and everyone in this country, nearly everyone, had no say whatsoever in how this agreement was put together and the negotiations that occurred to deliver the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And the faults and the dangers that are so obviously inherent in that agreement are reflected in our treaty process. And I was very disappointed when I saw the government's response to what I thought were 10 very good recommendations by the Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee about how we can actually reform the treaty process. In fact, I'll be honest, I stood up in here and said how disappointed I was that it didn't go far enough. Nevertheless, they were sensible recommendations. 3 years ago, when I started in the Senate, I actually wanted this treaty process reviewed. And I have been fighting with my party colleagues tooth and nail to have these trade deals, so-called trade deals, properly scrutinised. Now the issue is that the executive, the trade minister, in this case Minister Rob, is able to negotiate across 29 chapters. In fact, I understand it's 31 chapters now. That covers just about every aspect of our life here in this country. He's able to negotiate a global set of rules and regulations across just about every aspect of our society and our economy without coming to Parliament to have these issues debated, or without any oversight from us, the democratically elected representatives of the Australian people. And if you read the government's response to these 10 sensible recommendations, they say quite simply that under our Constitution, the executive has the power to negotiate these deals. And this was the way treaties were set up 115 years ago in this country, and it was reflected previously in the Westminster system in the UK, when back in those time periods governments were negotiating treaties relating to war. And when we look at how complex these deals are now, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, thousands of pages of text, how complex they are. The treaty process has not been able to keep up with the complexity of these trade deals and the dangers of these trade deals, and they are undemocratic. They are undemocratic. The system is set up so that these deals are signed before they're seen by Parliament or any of us. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the deal was signed before nearly anyone, even on the other side of the chamber in the government, saw any details. The possibility of perhaps the Attorney-General, the Prime Minister and one or two ministers at the most would have seen the details. We've had our negotiators at Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade who have the job of closing these deals. They've seen the details. And we know that hundreds of corporate lobbyists in the US have also participated and seen the details of these deals. No NGOs or civil society have seen the details in these texts. They've been included in briefings, but they haven't seen any details. And we have a situation like we do with every trade deal that we sign. And there's been a couple of them recently. We've had the so-called Japanese free trade deal, the so-called Korean free trade deal, and the so-called Chinese free trade deal. We've had a situation where we get given it lock, stock and barrel. And it goes through a process, the JSCOT, the Joint Standing Committee and Treaties process, but we can't change a thing. Now, there may very well be positive things in these treaties. They are so big and expansive, there may be things we agree with. But we have no choice as parliamentarians to vote for it lock, stock and barrel. Cannot change a thing. Cannot change a thing about them. And the process makes trade deals highly politicised. The government media unit give the information before we've seen it to their newspaper drops and other journalists. And the good news, supposed good news, is out there before we've had time to analyse it. And opposing these deals is like standing in front of a speeding train. It's almost impossible. Even if you've got perfectly rational and reasonable reasons to oppose substantial content in these deals. And my party have been very clear that we will not give corporations special rights to sue sovereign governments through investment state dispute settlement mechanisms. Not to mention the other undesirable aspects of the TPP that have now become clear. So, in 2 days' time, there'll be a massive news conference. The Prime Minister and Andrew Robb, and no doubt Senator Sinodinos in this chamber will be talking about what a great deal we've signed with 11 other countries, how it's going to revolutionise our lives. Well, actually, I think exactly the opposite. I think these deals have always failed to promise on what they've delivered. In fact, they've made our lives a lot more complicated and a lot more dangerous. And this recommendation in front of us, these 10 recommendations, at least allow these deals to be independently assessed. They allow someone like the Productivity Commission to look at technical aspects of these deals rather than just the experts that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade choose to use. They allow Parliament to review them before they're signed. Parliament should at least be able to review and debate these deals before they're signed. It allows some limited access to MPs and their advisors at various stages of the deal as it's being conducted. And it talks about creating a model trade treaty process in line with what other countries around the world do. To actually stand here and say that we're not going to change it because it's what we've done for 115 years is ludicrous. It is ludicrous. This deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is just one example. And there's opportunities in these deals to actually include content and binding agreements on things we care about, like labour standards and emissions reductions, sustainable fisheries, certification of the ethical conditions that things such as garments are produced under. There's so much more we could actually do if we had a say in how these deals were conducted and the content inside them. But no, it's the executive and its special interests. And whoever's got the loudest megaphone gets the deal. In fact, we've even had support from the most probably, you may think, most unlikely areas or stakeholders, such as the business community, are asking for a more open and transparent trade treaty process. It is broken. It is broken. And the actual name of the report, Blind Agreement, Reforming Australia's Treaty-Making Process, is a very apt description of what we're dealing here. We do enter into blind agreements. It's all the politics of the day. It's all about rushing them for a headline. It's all about not bothering to assess whether they have any benefits or what the risks might be. And we live in a democracy. They are essentially undemocratic. And if they weren't so incredibly important, if the content of these deals wasn't so incredibly important, you could probably argue that it's a good thing for the government to be able to do these things quickly. But things have changed. And we absolutely need to have a say in these kind of negotiations. And I I think it's quite simple. I think both the major parties, Labor and Liberal, don't want to give up that executive power, because when they're in government, they want to have the ability to do this. But it's high time we actually injected some democracy into our treaty-making process and some transparency, and most importantly, instilled some public confidence in the deals that we sign and they're on the front page of the newspapers when it suits the minister. Because the Australian public has lost confidence in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the Chinese Free Trade Agreement and the other deals that are supposedly going to deliver these benefits. This process is broken and it needs reform.
The question is that the motion moved by Senator Whish-Wilson be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it. So we'll now move to documents, committee